Hello, class. Welcome back to Writing for Communication. Today I am reviewing Chapter 7, Social Media. So, why use social media? Well, social media is a different way of developing that kind of interpersonal communication where instead of doing what you have whenever you're one on one with someone, um, like talking to them or in a one to many model where one person is sending a message out to everyone, or even a many to one model where you're receiving information from a large group of people, like you do with a survey. Which again, the one to many model is more of the traditional communication style that you'll see in newspapers or broadcasting. The many to many model used in social media provides a two-way interaction between large groups of people. So instead of one person sending a message out to a lot of people or only receiving information from a group, instead with social media, it's a lot of people sending and receiving information. So again, with that traditional media communication, we're looking at one sender with several receivers. And that's true whether we're talking about newspapers, magazines, radio, or TV, or even with certain types of advertising, like with billboards, or even with flyers. You're sending out a message, and all you're doing is it's one group or person sending that message instead of a instead of sending and receiving like we have with social media. So it's a higher possibility of getting feedback for different things, finding out what your audience wants most specifically, as opposed to having just occasional communication with them whenever you hire a marketing team or something like that. And when we look at a social audience, we're looking at that direct audience engagement. That means that you're more passionate users on different platforms. For example, if you're using Facebook and your average user is a big Facebook user as well, then you will have a very specific direct messaging platform with them where you're able to find out what's going on with them, see if maybe there's something trending in your particular community, and see what other things they're following, liking, or subscribing to. And hopefully, it will also work as a great platform for people who may not have found your website previously whenever they were, going on a web search looking for your product or service or a similar product or service to what you use. Maybe they wouldn't have seen it before because of how the search engine results appeared in their browser. But now, because you're associated with these other recommended groups, they're able to find your product or your service. So, one question that comes up a lot in modern business is, do you need social media to grow it? Well, it depends. It depends on what kind of audience you have and what your goals are. And also, of course, how much time you have to devote to that specific platform. So, is your target audience a group that uses a social media platform? Are you using the correct platform for your audience? Different age ranges use different types of social media. So some people may be more inclined to using TikTok versus using Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat. And you want to make sure that you are considering your audience's needs. Again, remember those 4 audience segmentations: demographics, geographics, psychographics, and behaviors. And think about that when you're reviewing your information and deciding whether or not social media is right for your specific audience. And you can find plenty of information about that online, especially with organizations like the Pew Research Center. They are constantly conducting surveys and working to find out who is using which platforms, or how they're using them as well. And whenever you are adding social media to your list of ways to interact with your audience, make sure that you're producing valuable content. Think about what would benefit your audience and how would they best receive that information. And also consider when you're posting things. So if you post at irregular times, then it's harder for people to know when you are going to provide your next update. So look for ways to be both timely and engaging in your posts. And you also, like I said, have to consider what you or your company can do. Which resources do you have available, and do you want to devote some of them to producing social media content? It does take time, and it is something that can be very important. For example, if you're in an internet-based business where all of your products are seen online, and maybe you also are like selling things through different platforms, or if you have your products available for your audience on there, you want to make sure that they're able to see that information and access those products or services, and that you have it in a way where they want to interact with it. All right, let's talk about using hashtags in social media posts. So, what is a hashtag? Well, a hashtag is those that set of horizontal and vertical lines that create what's also known as the pound, number, or a hash sign. And this used to be used back in the day for automated phone menus, and it started to be used to organize groups or ideas on platforms. So when people would post something, they would organize that information using the hash sign. And that came about around 2007. Chris Messina is the person credited with coming up with this idea and mentioning it to Twitter, now X. And his original tweet about it was, how do you feel about using and then he has a hash or pound sign for groups, as in hashtag barcamp, and then he has message in brackets right next to it. And originally, whenever Messina recommended this idea to Twitter, the Twitter people said, "Oh, well, that'll never catch on. It's way too complicated for the average person, blah, blah, blah." And of course, now everybody uses hashtags, and it's a very regular part of posting online. Now, effective hashtags are simple, relevant, and easy to understand. It's something where you want to make it easy for your audience to know what's going on. And usually, if you keep it pretty simple, it is more likely to catch on. People don't like things that are overly complicated. And whenever you're figuring out what kinds of hashtags to use, think about what's trending right now. And also, are there some maybe holidays or other events that you know are coming up and that relate to your business. And you can use that as the basis for developing your hash posts. So you can be on the first part of the trend and receive more exposure for your hashtag as opposed to getting buried at the bottom. And things to consider would be awareness campaigns, like when it's Cancer Awareness Month or when there's a holiday coming up, or even like local calendar events. For example, when we have Festival International, that's a big one, or if there's a Saints game coming up, or even something special with a school, like when UL had their homecoming events. So, whenever you're using hashtags, not only should you consider when are you posting this information, like are you posting it ahead of time or are you kind of lagging behind or what's going on? You also want to label your content based on what it is that you're discussing. So, think about your particular niche and do what kinds of themes or interests will work best with your specific audience. And that'll help you to promote brand awareness, and it can help you to figure out new ways to interact with your audience and become a hopefully eventually a trendsetter in your community, or at least being a strong part of the wave of whatever's happening in that moment. And one thing to keep in mind when you're working on creating these different ideas is brand relevance or usage. So double check how a hashtag is being used. There have been some somewhat somewhere between not great to disastrous uses for hashtags before, where people didn't check how the hashtag was being used, like when it was used for domestic violence awareness and someone related it to delivering pizza, which that one was a kind of a big disaster. But also ones, for example, if we're doing hashtag plants or plant life, well, there are two very different ways you can interpret that. One might be someone who has a bunch of houseplants, and the other one might be someone who enjoys recreational marijuana. So think about how those are being used. And another thing, avoid overusing hashtags. Different platforms have different recommendations about how many you should or shouldn't use in a post and where to include them. Like if you should have it in a comment versus having it in um, having it in your original headline for the post. So see what's recommended for the platform you're using. And a few examples, X, formerly Twitter, usually you want to limit it to one or two hashtags and use it to highlight keywords in your post. Facebook, actually, if you do facebook.com/hashtag and then another backslash and the name of whatever the hashtag is, you can see how hashtags are trending on that platform. Um, Instagram allows you to have up to 30. However, they recommend only like 5 or 10 at most. And if you include them in the first comment instead of in your original caption with your video or your picture, then it tends to look a bit cleaner. Now, Pinterest is one of those platforms where they really don't recommend hashtags necessarily. You can still put them, but they're generally speaking, they usually don't recommend that. Um, TikTok, you can use a few, like normally you can pretty easily search which hashtags are trending, and you can look for a way to develop maybe a brand related or a broader trending hashtag, like including hashtag tourism, but then hashtag Louisiana tourism, maybe along with it. So you can get slightly more specific, but still general area. And LinkedIn will actually mark your post as spam if you include more than 5 hashtags. YouTube, they'll do the same thing if you include more than 15. So in general, when you're looking at hashtags and things, make sure that you're kind of checking out the platform first, seeing how things are being used, and then proceeding as needed. All right, now let's talk about reading a URL. I noticed a few of you have been doing the thing with your references where you're including the hypertext instead of the actual URL. So I felt like it would be a good idea for all of us to look at this real quick and see, what are the parts in a URL, and then that way you'll understand what you're seeing and you'll be able to remove unwanted content, like when the URL includes a bunch of highlighted stuff. And so it ends up being this like huge paragraph of information when it doesn't need to be. All right. So in order to discuss URLs, let's talk about something else called a URI. Now, what is a URI? Well, it is the Uniform Resource Identifier. That's right. It's called a Uniform Resource Identifier. And this item provides a resource's location. It can be identified through a unique string of information. And that means that this unique string of information refers to either a website, an image, a blog. It could also refer to a book. It just depends on what kind of URI we are using. Now, there are two kinds of URIs. There's a URL and a URN. Now, these are the two main types of uniform resource items we'll talk about. The first one, Uniform Resource Locator, that is the thing that you're copying and pasting when you're getting something on the internet. This could refer to images, videos, text, anything that you're connecting to through the internet. And this is something that can change over time and become what's called a dead location or a dead link. That's when the item is moved, and so that original URL, Uniform Resource Locator, is no longer valid. Now, a Uniform Resource Name, or URN, as in Nancy, refers to a resource by name. So, for example, a book's ISBN, so that International Standard Book Number, is a URN. So URN refers to a resource by name. A URL is a location on the internet. All right, so different parts of a URL, the Uniform Resource Locator, are the scheme, the authority, the path to the file, the parameters, and the anchor. So basic parts of a URL, we are looking at the scheme, the authority, the path to the file, the parameters, and the anchor. Now, each of those parts tells your web browser where this particular item, whether it's a web page or an image or whatever, is located on the internet. So the first part of a URL is the scheme. That is very similar to a postal code in a mailing address, and it tells your computer where it needs to start looking. And this could even refer to looking in an email. So if you see mail to colon and then it's something that's referring to an email. In this case, most of the time when we're talking about a scheme and you're looking for something, we're online, we're looking at it beginning with HTTP or HTTPS. And the difference between those two is something that's happened over the years, where instead of it being like the original Hypertext Transfer Protocol or HTTP, which is an unsecured connection where it's sending that data and people are able to intercept it and read it without having to decode anything. The HTTPS is actually a secured version. And that's why sometimes your web browser, especially if you're using something like Chrome, will say, hey, your connection is unsecure. People can connect to your data, blah, blah, blah. That's what they're talking about, is that you have information that's being sent unencrypted and it's traveling between locations and can be taken by somebody else along the way, and they can like intercept it and change it or do something to it. So most websites now have a kind of digital certificate that they pay for, and it's part of their like web functioning payments and all that stuff. And that digital certificate ensures that they're encrypting the information and it's automatically telling the web browser, hey, this stuff's encrypted and it's okay for you to send and receive. And whenever we're talking about hypertext, so hypertext is a format where it isn't just text that you read. It's where it looks more like it's that text that you read, but you're able to click on it and it brings you to another page or a picture or something. That is called hypertext. And that term was coined by someone named Ted Nelson in the 60s. And one of his like compatriots, Douglas Engelbart, excuse me, was also in computer science. He's the person who created the computer mouse, actually. And he was the one who was able to develop functional hypertext. So those two people are very, were deep into the development of this pre-web hypertext and formatting and all that kind of stuff. So, like I said, the beginning part is called the scheme, and that's that HTTPS part that you usually see with a web address. The second part is actually in two pieces, the authority. So the authority is the part that follows the colon and the two backslashes on the address. That's where it's www.something.com or .net or whatever. And of course, www is World Wide Web. And so that first part where it's that like example.com, that is the domain name for the authority. And then there's usually another part that follows the .com that has a colon and then a number. And that number is called the port. Now, most web addresses don't even show that part anymore. It's usually .com and then it has a backslash. That's because the majority of the internet uses like two different port numbers, and depending on whether you're using HTTP or HTTPS, so you don't really have to worry about that part as much, but it does exist. It isn't visible usually in your browser, but that and the domain name together are called the authority. So the domain name is telling it which web server is being requested. A lot of times when you're figuring out what domain name you want to buy, you're usually choosing something like the name of your company, or maybe if you have a famous product, then it's the name of your product, that kind of thing. Or for people who want to have a website as their reference whenever they're applying for jobs and stuff, like if you want to have an online portfolio, then you might have your name as the domain name. And most websites, commercial websites, are going to be .com. The the government ones, there are some that use .com now, but most of them are going to be .gov for the United States. Other countries have different domains depending on what it is they're doing. Um, and then, like I said, the port is actually telling your computer which gate to access resources. But again, that isn't visible. Usually that part is kind of left off whenever you're looking at a URL in your browser. So the next section is the path to the resource. So we had the scheme at the beginning and then the authority, which included the domain and the port. And now we're at the path to the resource. And this is where those like backslashes come in, where it's like backslash path, backslash to, backslash myfile.html. So it's it used to be an actual physical file location, but now it's usually a like a web file handled by servers. So think about like when you search for something on your computer. If you don't have it saved on your desktop, usually you have to go to a hard drive. And then within that hard drive, there's a file folder. And within that, you might have another file folder. It's that kind of setup. And then the dot whatever at the end is telling you what kind of file you're accessing. So if it's .html, it's an HTML style web page. Now, this next part is the part that a lot of you are leaving on and isn't, it may be necessary, but it may also be something that you can like, this is where we're getting into the, okay, do I really need to include this in my my reference section? When we talk about parameters, this is the extra stuff that is included based on what you're accessing and how you're using it. And this is something where there are usually like key value pairs. So it's explaining normally like how big something is, when is a video starting, that kind of thing. And it includes that ampersand, the and sign. It's that little like kind of squiggly looking thing that means and. And one example, which you can see in the slides, is play an embedded video. And we can see it has an HTTPS scheme. It has that little colon, backslash, backslash, and it goes to youtube.com. So that's our authority. And then backslash, and then it says watch question mark V equals VXUTBIP, blah, blah, blah. And the blah, blah, blah part is where you'll see that it's telling you, hey, we're playing this video. Where is this video? It's in this channel and it's going to be in 4K and all that kind of stuff. Now, this is the part that you definitely don't need whenever you're including information in your URL. And this is the anchor. So when you're writing a reference, and let's say you looked it up on Google and you asked it a specific question, and it highlights an answer from a particular website. So you click on that link to see the website and get the URL from it. Well, that highlighted section is the anchor. And this is a bookmark inside the resource where it is telling your web browser, hey, not only do you need to look up this specific location, but I want you to scroll down to this area and highlight this information. And there it can do a few other things, but that's the main one we're talking about. So you can find the anchor. It's usually after a hashtag, and you'll see that there are some dividers inside of the anchor explaining to the computer like what it's going to see in the text and where to start and stop the highlighting. So if we look at a web address where it's highlighting something, the first part in this that you can see in the slide is HTTPS, which is our scheme again, right? And then colon, 2 backslashes, then our authority, pbs.org, and then it has a backslash with our path to this particular location. So we're going to NewsHour, not just the NewsHour section, but within the arts section. And it is a website about Dia de los Muertos, and it has which specific title we're looking at here. And if we look, there is at the end of the title of the information, there's another hashtag, and then it has a colon and a little tilde, and then another colon, and then text equals, and it gives us a bunch of letters, percent signs, and numbers in here. And if you click on it, you can see exactly what they're talking about in there. Okay, so you can see that it went straight to this specific subheading paragraph and highlighted this information in purple. So all of the words that were highlighted are selected in here. And you can see that it looks like this little percent sign and the number 20 mean a space in between each one. And the like which paragraph section information, actually, excuse me, this looks like it's for the special number, but you get the idea. It's telling your computer exactly which piece of text to highlight, and you can see it reflected right here. So we actually don't need that information whenever you're writing your references. The main part we need is we need to know what website and which article. So anything at this hashtag and anything after it can be deleted. So your most accurate version of the URL would look like this, where we have the pbs.org /newshour/arts /title of the piece. So we are done cleaning up this URL, and it is ready to be part of our references. So again, not hypertext where it's a set of words describing what's in here, what it's linking to. Instead, you want the actual link. And a reminder, make sure you finish reviewing chapters 6 and 7 before Group Jeopardy on Friday, and go ahead and start working on writing project 4, and I will see you on Friday.